The ancient ring shouldn't have been glowing. Dr. Marina Williams pressed her palms against her eyes, certain that exhaustion was playing tricks on her vision. But when she looked again at 2:47 a.m., the medieval artifact still pulsed with an inner light that violated every law of physics she'd spent 12 years studying. The ruby at its center beat like a heart, casting crimson shadows across her cluttered Harvard laboratory. She'd been examining the ring for 3 weeks now, ever since it arrived from a private collector's estate in Florence. The documentation was sparse 14th century, possibly Tuscan, origin unknown. But Marina had developed an instinct for authenticity during her dual PhDs in medieval archaeology and quantum physics, a combination that made her colleagues either deeply respectful or deeply suspicious. This ring was real, and it was doing something impossible. The sound of shattering glass echoed from the hallway, sharp and deliberate in the tomb-quiet building. Marina's head snapped up, blonde waves spilling over her shoulders as she reached instinctively for her phone. Dead, of course. No. She'd been so absorbed in her work that she'd forgotten to charge it. "Hello?" Her voice cracked slightly. Security. Silence stretched like a held breath. On the bench before her, the ring's glow intensified, and Marina felt something she'd never experienced in her methodical, rational Lafia pull that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with longing, as if the artifact recognized her. Another sound, deliberate footsteps crunching over broken glass, moving with purpose toward her lab. Marina's heart hammered against her ribs as she backed away from the workbench, but her eyes remained fixed on the ring. The pull grew stronger, making her fingertips tingle with an electric awareness that felt dangerously like desire. She glanced toward the window and froze. The solar eclipse that wasn't scheduled until tomorrow afternoon was happening now, in the dead of night. The moon devoured the sun in impossible defiance of orbital mechanics, casting golden twilight across the Boston skyline. Marina checked her watch again, 2:48 a.m. "That's not possible," she whispered. Solar eclipses required specific alignments that couldn't occur at night. The wrongness of it made her skin crawl. But she couldn't look away from the cosmic impossibility playing out beyond her window. The ring pulsed brighter, and Marina's feet moved of their own accord. Step by step, drawn forward against every rational instinct she possessed, her scientific mind screamed warnings. But something deeper, something that lived in her bones, rather than her brain, whispered that this moment had been inevitable since the day she was born. "No," she muttered, pressing her back against the wall. No. But her hand was already reaching out, trembling as it extended toward the ancient metal. She could see intricate engravings now that hadn't been visible before, 2 serpents intertwined to form an infinity symbol. Carved with such delicate precision they seemed to writhe in the shifting light. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. Marina's fingers brushed the cold metal, and the world exploded into blinding white light. She felt herself falling through an endless void. Wind screaming past her face as voices called out in languages that felt familiar despite being incomprehensibly Italian, Latin, something older and more primal. Her lab coat whipped around her like wings, and she caught fragments of images that felt more like memories than visions. Cobblestone streets, slick with rain. Horse-drawn carriages, the scent of fresh bread and lavender, and through it all, a man's voice calling her name with desperate urgency. Her last conscious thought was that she'd made a terrible mistake, or perhaps, finally, the right choice. The laboratory fell silent, except for the steady drip of water from a broken pipe. On the workbench, an empty indentation marked where the ring had rested for 3 weeks. The impossible eclipse faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the normal darkness of a Boston night and the lingering scent of lavender that had no earthly reason to exist in a sterile academic building. But in a photograph tucked behind Marina's computer monitor group, shot from a conference in Florence, 2 years ago something had changed. In the background, barely visible among the crowd of academics and tourists, stood a figure that hadn't been there before, a woman with blonde hair wearing medieval dress, her hand raised as if waving goodbye across the centuries. Drip, 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 water hitting stone in a steady rhythm pulled Marina back to consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar wooden beams crossing overhead, dark and polished with age. Sunlight filtered through heavy red velvet curtains, painting everything in warm amber tones that belonged in a Renaissance painting. It's not reality. This wasn't her sterile apartment. This wasn't even the same century. Madonna Mia, finally awake. The voice warm honey laced with an Italian accent made. Her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with nausea and everything to do with recognition. Marina turned her head and nearly lost consciousness again. A man sat in a chair beside the bed. Calling him handsome would be like calling the Sistine Chapel decorative. Dark waves framed a face with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was his eyes that stole her breath green as summer forests in studying her, with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. He wore a white linen shirt open at the collar and wool trousers that looked hand-tailored by someone who understood fabric in ways modern manufacturers had forgotten. Where am I? Marina struggled to sit up, but dizziness forced her back onto what felt like the softest mattress in existence. My home in Firenze, the man replied, leaning forward with genuine concern creasing his brow. I am Tommaso Duca, and you, Bella, literally fell from the sky into my garden last night during the eclipse. Marina blinked rapidly, trying to process his words. Florence, Italy. But she'd been in Boston when? Hours ago? Days? And why was he dressed like he'd stepped out of a period film? What year is it? The question came out higher than intended. Tinged with barely controlled panic, Tom's laughed. A rich sound that made something deep in her chest respond despite her confusion. 1348 Naturalmente, October 15th to be precise. You hit your head quite hard when you fell. Perhaps it scrambled your thoughts. The number hit her like a physical blow.
1348.
The height of the Renaissance was still a century away.
This was
The era of the Black Death, of political upheaval, of a world so different from her own that survival would require more than just adapting to different technology. It would require becoming a different person entirely. You were speaking strangely when I found you, Tommaso continued, his voice carrying genuine warmth, but his eyes studying her with sharp intelligence. Words I did not recognize. Marina forced herself to sit up, ignoring the spinning room and the way her vision wavered at the edges. She took in the antique furniture that wasn't antique high-right, was simply furniture. The inkwell and quill on the desk, the wash basin and pitcher on the stand. The complete absence of any conveniences she'd taken for granted her entire life. This is impossible, she breathed, pressing her palm to her forehead where a dull ache throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. But as she spoke, she looked at her hand, and there it was, ring. On her finger, as if it had always belonged there. Now she could see details she'd missed before, intricate engravings. Along the band and the way the red stone seemed to hold depths like looking into still water. Quello Anello, Tommaso said, pointing to the jewelry with obvious recognition. You were wearing it when I found you. Very old. I recognized the symbol. What symbol? Marina raised her hand, examining the ring closely for the first time since putting it on. Engraved on the band was the marking she'd glimpsed before. 2 serpents intertwined to form an infinity symbol. So delicately carved they seemed to move. In the shifting light, Tommaso stood with fluid grace and retrieved a thick, dusty book from his desk. The leather binding cracked with age as he flipped through pages carefully until he found what he sought. Echo. He pointed to an illustration that made Marina's blood turn to ice. The symbol was identical to her rings, down to the smallest detail. The book showed figures wearing similar rings, with Latin text surrounding the image in careful script. Does it say? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommaso read aloud, his accent making the ancient words sound like poetry. Those who bear the ring may cross the barriers of time, but only when sun and moon dance together in the sky. He looked at Marina with growing understanding. There was a solar eclipse last night, Bella. Very rare to see one in darkness. My grandfather always said such things were portents. Marina felt the world tilt on its axis. Solar eclipse at night, the ring. 1348. Everything fit together in a terrifyingly perfect pattern that her rational mind wanted to reject but couldn't deny. I need air, she said weakly, attempting to stand on legs that felt like water. Temma was beside her instantly, catching her shoulders with hands that were both gentle and strong. Piano, piano, he murmured. You are still weak. Let me help. You. His touch sent electricity shooting up her arms. And Marina looked into Tommaso's green eyes, feeling the strangest sensation, as if she'd known him for years instead of minutes. As if he were familiar in a way that transcended explanation, like coming home to a place she'd never been but had dreamed about her entire life. You're certain it's 1348, she whispered, even though she already knew the answer. Tommaso smiled, and Marina was absolutely certain her heart stopped beating for a full second. Certissimo, beautiful Marina. And now that you are here, I have the strange feeling my life just became much more interesting than I ever imagined possible. And outside the window, the bells of Florence's cathedral began to chime 9 o'clock, in a melody that seemed older than time itself. Marina Williams, 21st century scientist, was officially trapped in 1348 in the home of a devastatingly handsome Italian, who made her feel like she'd found something she didn't even know she'd been searching for, and the most terrifying part? A piece of Hera, peace that grew stronger with every moment she spent looking into Tommaso's eyes. Didn't want to go back to her own time at all? The ring pulsed once on her finger, as if in acknowledgement of her thoughts, and somewhere in the distance, church bells continued their eternal song of time passing and chances taken. Present day, Boston Thomas Lancaster jolted awake in his downtown apartment, cold sweat beading his forehead despite the October chill seeping through his windows. The same dream again, ungolden light flooding everything, a woman with blonde hair, calling his name with desperate urgency, and the overwhelming scent of lavender that felt more real than the sheets tangled around his legs. He'd been having these dreams for months now, ever since his 28th birthday in March. Always the same fragments, cobblestone streets that belonged in old movies. The sound of church bells echoing across red-tiled rooftops, and a desperate feeling that he was supposed to be somewhere else, with someone else. Thomas stumbled to his kitchen, the hardwood floor cold against his bare feet. As a successful architectural restoration specialist, he'd learned to trust his instincts about old buildings and historical accuracy. His firm had built their reputation on his uncanny ability to understand how structures were meant to look, as if he'd seen them in their original glory.
Ow.
But these dreams felt different. Not like imagination or professional intuition, but like remembering something that had actually happened to him. His phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Text from his business partner, Jake Morrison. New project came in overnight. Harvard wants us to restore their archaeology building. Something about mysterious damage to one of their labs. Police are calling it unexplained phenomena. You interested? Pays double our usual rate. Thomas stared at the message, an odd chill running down his spine. Harvard, the archaeology building. In his dreams, that's always where the blonde woman appeared. First in some kind of laboratory filled with ancient artifacts. I'll take it, he typed back. When can I see the site? This morning, if you want. Dr. Martinez is meeting us at 9 a.m. Fair warning, Thoth police report is weird as hell. Thomas was already reaching for his clothes. Whatever had happened at Harvard, he had the strangest feeling it was connected to the dreams that were slowly driving him insane. 1348. Florence, Italy, you are not from here. Tommaso observed 3 days later, watching Marina attempt to navigate the unfamiliar clothing he'd provided. The dress borrowed from his younger sister Francesca hung awkwardly on Marina's frame. Despite being roughly the right size, her movements were all wrong, too direct, too purposeful for a woman of this era. Marina paused in her struggle with the corset laces, her face flushed with frustration. What gave me away? The fact that I don't know how to dress myself. Tommaso laughed, the sound rich and warm in the morning sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows, among other things. Your posture, the way you walk, even how you speak. Very unusual for a lady. I'm not a lady, Marina said without thinking, then caught herself. I don't come from wealth or nobility, but You are educated. Tommaso moved closer, his green eyes studying her with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. You speak like someone who has read many books, studied at university perhaps. Marina realized she was walking through a minefield. In 1348, women who could read were rare. Women who attended university were non-existent. Her 2 PhDs would sound impossible, maybe even dangerous. Some women in my region learn letters, she said carefully. It's becoming more common. Interesting. Tommaso handed her a brush for her hair. Tell me about this region. What is it like? Marina met his eyes in the looking glass and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Over the past 3 days, Tommaso had shown her nothing but kindness and patience. He'd fed her, clothed her, asked no uncomfortable questions about her strange appearance in his garden. More than that, he'd looked at her like she was fascinating rather than frightening, a reaction she'd rarely experienced even in her own time. It's very different from here, she said quietly. Women have more freedom. We can choose our own paths, our own work. Did you choose? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Marina could lie, invent some acceptable occupation for a medieval woman, or she could trust this man who had already seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen compassion over suspicion. I studied the past, she said finally. Ancient things, lost knowledge. Tommaso's hand stilled on her shoulder. Like the ring, like the ring. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Marina found herself cataloging details she'd never noticed before. The way morning light caught the gold flecks in Tommaso's eyes, the calluses on his hands, that spoke of physical work despite his obvious wealth, the small scar along his jaw that gave his perfect features an appealing imperfection. Marina, he said softly, and her name in his accent sounded like a prayer. I must tell you something, and I fear you will think me mad. She turned to face him fully, seeing uncertainty in his expression, for the first time since she'd known him. Tell me. I've been dreaming of you. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for days. For months before, you appeared. I dreamed of a woman with golden hair who spoke strangely and looked at the world with eyes that had seen wonders beyond imagination. In my dreams, you were always trying to tell me something urgent, something important, but I could never understand the words. Marina's breath caught. What did I look like in these dreams? Exactly as you do now, except you wore strange clothes, white like a physician's robes, but cut in a way I had never seen. And you carried objects that made no sense, rectangular light. Sources, small speaking boxes. He paused, studying her face. You know what I described, don't you? Marina nodded slowly. A lab coat. Her phone. Modern technology that wouldn't be invented for centuries. There's something else, Tommaso continued. In the dreams, we were not strangers. We knew each other well. He trailed off, color rising. In his cheeks, we loved each other. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Desperately. Completely. As if we had searched for each other across lifetimes and finally found home. Marina felt the room tilt around her. This was impossible, but then again, so was time travel, and she was living proof that impossible things could happen. Tommaso, she whispered, and saw him shiver at the sound of his name on her lips. I need to show you something. She pulled the ring from her finger for the first time since arriving. The moment the metal left her skin, the world shimmered. Around the edges, as if reality was threatening to dissolve, it's the book you showed. Meat said the ring allows passage between times, but only during eclipses. What it didn't say is that it bonds with its wearer. I can feel it calling to me even now, trying to pull me back to my own time. Tommaso reached out and gently took the ring, turning it over in his palm. The moment his fingers touched the metal, his eyes widened in shock. Dio mio, he breathed. Yeah, I can see it. Your world. Towers of glass reaching toward the sky, horseless carriages moving faster than thought. People speaking across vast distances through small boxes. He looked at her with wonder and heartbreak. It is magnificent and terrible, and you shine in it like a star. But I don't belong there anymore, Marina said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. not really. The past because I felt disconnected from the present. Here, with you, I feel more alive than I ever have. Tommaso handed the ring back to her, and she felt the world solidify once more as it touched her skin. But your work, your studies early, you must miss them. Marina laughed, but there was no humor in it.
I was alone in that world, Tommaso.
Respected, perhaps, but completely alone. Here, I have you. For how long? The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of inevitability. The next eclipse will come, and the ring will pull you back whether you wish it or not. Marina looked into his green eyes and made a decision that would have terrified her 3 days ago. Then we'd better make the most of whatever time we have. Tommaso stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Marina, he said, her name a caress. Are you certain? Once we cross this line, there will be no going back to being strangers. Instead of answering with words, Marina rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but when Tommaso's arms came around her waist and pulled her closer, something ignited between them that felt older than time itself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tommaso rested his forehead against hers. The eclipse book, he whispered. I need to read it again. If the ring truly bonds with its wearer, there might be a way to what? To keep you. Here. Forever. Outside, church bells began to toll the hour. But for the first time since arriving in 1348, Marina didn't count the chimes. She was too busy drowning in green eyes and the impossible promise of a love that could transcend time itself. Present-day Harvard University, Thomas stood in the destroyed laboratory, his breath misting in the unseasonably cold air. The damage was unlike anything he'd seen in 15 years of restoration work. Scorch marks radiated from a central point, near the workbench, but there was no evidence of fire. The walls bore stress fractures that suggested an implosion rather than explosion. And in the center of it all, a perfect circle of undamaged floor where something had clearly been resting. Dr. Elena Martinez, the department head, wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The police have no explanation. No accelerants, no explosive residue, no electrical faults. Dr. Williams was working late that night, but she never checked out of the building. Security found the lab like this the next morning, and she was simply gone. Dr. Williams? Thomas felt that familiar chill run down his spine. Marina Williams, one of our most brilliant archaeologists. She was analyzing a medieval ring from a private estate in Florence when this happened. Dr. Martinez gestured to the destruction around them. The ring disappeared with her. Thomas knelt beside the workbench, running his fingers along the scorched surface. The moment his palm touched the damaged wood, images flooded his mind. A woman with blonde hair reaching toward something that glowed with inner light. The impossible sight of a solar eclipse at night. The overwhelming scent of lavender that had haunted his dreams for months. Marina, he whispered, and the name felt like coming home. Dr. Martinez frowned. Did you know her? Thomas straightened, his mind racing. Can I see her research notes? Any documentation about the ring she was studying? I suppose that would be helpful for understanding the damage patterns. Dr. Martinez led him to an undamaged filing cabinet. Though I warn you, Marina was unconventional in her methods. She had theories about quantum mechanics and temporal displacement that most of our faculty found rather far-fetched. Thomas opened Marina's files with shaking hands. Her handwriting was precise, methodical, but as he read, he felt his reality shifting around him. Notes about serpent symbols and time guardians, calculations involving eclipse patterns and electromagnetic fields, and throughout it all, sketches of a ring that made his chest tight with recognition. But it was the final entry that stopped his heart, October 14th, 2:30 a.m. The ring is responding to the approaching eclipse in ways that defy explanation. I feel compelled to touch it, as if it's calling to me specifically. More disturbing, I've been having dreams about a man in Renaissance clothing who seems to know me. His name is Tommaso, and in the dreams we're connected somehow. I know this sounds insane, but I can't shake the feeling that the ring isn't just an artifact, it's a bridge to someone I'm meant to find. Thomas sank into Marina's chair, his hands trembling as he flipped through page after page of research that aligned perfectly with the dreams that had been driving him slowly mad. "Dr. Martinez," he said carefully, "do you have any photographs of Dr. Williams?" She pulled out a departmental directory and pointed to a professional headshot. Thomas stared at the image of a woman with intelligent hazel eyes and blonde hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. This was the woman from his dreams. This was Marina. And somehow, impossibly, she was trapped in the past, calling to him across centuries. 1348 Florence, Italy. Marina woke to the sound of heated voices coming from downstairs. She'd been living in Tommaso's house for 2 weeks now, the happiest and most terrifying 2 weeks of her life. They'd established a routine, mornings spent in his private library researching the ring and its properties, afternoons exploring Florence together, evenings talking by the fire until the small hours of the morning, and nights, when Tommaso's careful Renaissance propriety gave way to stolen kisses and gentle touches that left them both aching for more. But now, angry voices were shattering the peace they'd built together. Marina crept to the top of the stairs, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. Through the carved wooden banister, she could see Tommaso facing 3 men in expensive robes. Local merchants by their dress, but their postures spoke of barely contained violence. "She is a witch, Tommaso," one of them was saying. "The entire city whispers about the woman who fell from the sky." "Strange lights, unnatural eclipses. Signor Benedetti, you speak nonsense," Tommaso interrupted. But Marina could hear the tension in his voice. "Marina is a guest in my home, nothing more. A guest who speaks no proper Italian, who knows nothing of our customs, who appeared during an eclipse that the church calls a harbinger of dark times." Another man stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his dagger. "The plague has returned to the eastern districts, Tommaso. People are afraid, and they need someone to blame." Marina's blood turned to ice as the Black Death. In her studies, she'd read about the pandemic that would kill 1/3 of Europe's population between 1347 and 1351. But she'd been so caught up in her feelings for Tommaso that she'd forgotten this was the very beginning of the outbreak in Florence. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Tommaso's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Give her to the church authorities," the third man said. "Let them determine if she's innocent or not. If she truly has nothing to hide, God will protect her." Marina pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Trial by ordeal. The church's method for determining guilt or innocence through various forms of torture. Few women accused of witchcraft survived the process, regardless of their actual innocence. "Get out," Tommaso said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Get out of my house before I forget that we've been friends since childhood, Benedetti. This isn't over, Tommaso. The people demand justice, and if you won't provide it," I said, "get out." Marina heard the sound of the heavy wooden door slamming, followed by Tommaso's weary sigh. She made her way downstairs, finding him slumped in a chair by the cold fireplace, his head in his hands. "How much did you hear?" he asked, without looking up. "Enough." Marina knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "Tommaso, they're right about one thing. My presence here is dangerous for both of us."
Yes.
He lifted his head, and she saw fear in his green eyes for the first time. "I won't let them hurt you, Marina. I'll send you away, somewhere safe." "Where?" Marina stood, beginning to pace the length of the room. "I have no papers, no family, no explanation for my existence that won't raise the same suspicions. And even if you could hide me, what about you? Harboring a suspected witch would make you complicit in their eyes." Tommaso rose and caught her hands, stilling her movement. "Then what do you suggest?" Marina looked into his eyes and felt her. "Heartbreak. I suggest we face the truth we've both been avoiding. The ring brought me here for a reason, but not to stay. Every day I remain, I put you in more danger. Plague will get worse, the paranoia will increase, and eventually, even your wealth and position won't protect us." "No," Tommaso's grip on her hands tightened. "I've spent weeks researching every text in my library. There has to be another way. The ring responds to eclipses, yes, but there are patterns. Cycles we don't understand, Tommaso. Marina reached up and cupped his face. In her palms, I love you. More than I thought it was possible to love another person. But love isn't always enough to change reality. Tears she'd never seen from him before gathered in his eyes. It has to be, Marina. Not now, when I've finally found the person my soul has been searching for. Marina felt her own tears spill over and helped me understand the ring completely. If there's truly a way for us to be together, for me to stay here permanently, or for you to come with Mew, need to find it before the next eclipse. Tommaso nodded, wiping the tears from her cheeks with gentle thumbs. The next eclipse visible from Florence won't occur for 18 months. We have time. No, Marina whispered, and watched his face crumble as understanding dawned. I can feel it, Tommaso. The ring is getting stronger, pulling harder. The eclipse doesn't have to be visible from here. It just has to be happening somewhere. A lunar eclipse in 3 days. They stood in the growing darkness of his parlor, holding each other as if they could stop time through will alone. Outside, church bells began to toll the evening hour, counting down the moments they had left. 3 days, Tommaso said finally. 3 days, Marina agreed. Then we'd better make them count. Out. But even as he kissed her with desperate intensity, Marina couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a battle that had already been lost. The ring pulsed on her finger like a countdown, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of her own time calling her home. 1348, Florence, Italy. 2 days before the eclipse, Marina found Tommaso in his library at dawn, surrounded by ancient texts and scrolls. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the hollow shadows beneath his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands, as he turned pages with increasingly frantic urgency. Echo, he said without looking up, his voice hoarse from hours of reading aloud in Latin. I found something. Marina approached cautiously, her heart already breaking at the desperate hope in his voice. They'd spent the previous day making love with the intensity of people who knew their time was running out, and she'd memorized every line of his face, every scar on his hands, every way he said her name like a prayer. The ring isn't just a conduit for time travel, Tommaso continued, pointing to a passage in what looked like a grimoire bound in cracked leather. It's a soul bond. When two people are connected across time destined for each other's, ring can create a permanent bridge, but only if both parties possess equal rings and perform the binding ritual during an eclipse. Marina felt her breath catch. Equal rings? You mean there's another one? Tommaso's smile was both triumphant and heartbroken. My family has guarded its twin for generations. We were told it was a relic of the Crusades, a symbol of love that transcends death itself. He stood and walked to an ornate chest in the corner, retrieving a wooden box that looked ancient even by medieval standards. Never understood why I was compelled to keep it close, why I felt incomplete without it nearby, until now. Opened the box, revealing a ring identical to Marina's in every way except one where hers held a ruby. His contained a sapphire that pulsed with the same inner light. Dio mio, Marina whispered, understanding flooding through her. We're connected. We always have been across centuries. That's why you dreamed of me, why I felt drawn to study your era specifically. The ritual is complex, Tommaso said, setting the ring on the table between them. It requires both parties to willingly sacrifice their connection to their original time and bind themselves to a new realitone that exists between past and present, accessible to both but belonging entirely to neither. Marina stared at the sapphire ring, her scientific mind racing through the implications. A pocket dimension, space outside normal temporal flow, where we could exist together without disrupting the timeline of either era. But there's a cost. Tommaso's voice grew heavy. Once the binding is complete, we can never return to our original times. We would exist in eternal twilight, together but isolated from the rest of humanity. Marina met his eyes and saw her own desperate longing reflected. There, 3 weeks ago, the choice would have been impossible. Now, looking at the man who had become her entire world, it felt like the only choice that mattered. What about the people counting on us? She asked quietly. Your sister, your friends, your business interests here, my colleagues in Boston. My research will continue without us, as they always have. Tommaso moved around the table and took her hands. Marina, I have spent my entire life feeling like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Every woman I courted, every friendship I formed, every achievement I accomplished, nothing filled the hollow space inside me, till you fell from the sky and made me whole. Marina felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. I love you, she whispered. But I'm terrified. What if we're wrong? What if the ritual fails and we lose each other entirely? Then we'll face that. Failure together. Tommaso pressed his forehead against hers. But if we don't try, I'll lose you anyway when the eclipse comes. At least this way, we have a chance. Before Marina could respond, urgent pounding echoed from the front door. They froze, listening as Tommaso's manservant answered in harsh. Voices filled the entrance hall. Church authorities, Tommaso breathed, his face going pale. They've come for you. Marina's mind raced. They could run, but where? Hide. But for how long? The eclipse was still 2 days away, too long to evade capture. In a city where her foreign appearance made her instantly recognizable. There's only one choice left, she said, sliding the ruby ring from her finger. The world immediately began to shimmer around the edges, reality threatening to dissolve. The ritual now. Marina, without proper preparation, there's no time. Marina grabbed the sapphire ring from the box, feeling its power thrum against her palm. Tell me what to do. The pounding on the door grew more insistent, accompanied by official voices demanding entry in the name of the Holy Church. Tommaso's eyes met hers for one desperate moment before he nodded. Take my ring. Put it on your right hand while I take yours. His voice was steady, despite the chaos erupting around them. We must speak the binding words simultaneously as the rings touch our skin. Marina slipped the sapphire ring onto her right hand, while Tommaso took the ruby. The moment both rings were in place, the world around them began to fracture like broken glass. Per eternum, per amorem, per tempus, ipsum, Tommaso began, his voice growing stronger with each word. For eternity, for love, for time itself. Marina repeated the Latin phrases, feeling power building between them like an electrical storm. The rings blazed with light ruby and sapphire combining into brilliant white fire that consumed everything in their vision. Duo corda, una, anima, semper. Simul, they spoke together. Oh, two hearts, one soul, forever united. The library disappeared. Florence disappeared. Time itself seemed to collapse inward, as Marina felt herself falling through the void agon but. This time, Tommaso's hand was locked in hers, his presence an anchor in the chaos. Present-day Harvard University Thomas stood in the ruins of Marina's laboratory, the restoration work forgotten, as he stared at the documentation spread across a makeshift table. Every page of her research aligned perfectly with the dreams that had haunted him for months. But it was the final entry that made his hands shake. If someone is reading this, know that I made a choice. The ring showed me a love that transcends time itself, and I chose to follow it into the unknown. Thomas Lancaster, if you exist, if you're real, if you're looking for men, know that I'm waiting somewhere between moments, between heartbeats, in a place where time cannot touch us. Find me. Thomas closed his eyes and felt tears he couldn't explain sliding down his cheeks. He didn't understand how, but he knew with absolute certainty that Marina Williams was more than just a missing person. She was the other half of his soul, separated by centuries, but connected by something stronger than time. A strange warmth pulsed against his chest, and Thomas looked down to see light emanating from beneath his shirt. With trembling hands, he pulled out a chain he'd worn since childhood, a gift from his grandmother that he'd never questioned. Hanging from the silver links was a ring set with a sapphire that now blazed with inner fire. Madonna mia, he whispered. In perfect Italian, though, he'd never studied the language in his life. Marina. The ring pulsed once, twice, and Thomas felt the familiar pull from his dream snout. Toward sleep this time, but toward something infinitely more real. He understood now that the dreams weren't memories of what had been, but visions of what could. Without hesitation, he slipped the ring onto his finger, The world dissolved into light. The space between Marina stood in a garden that existed nowhere and everywhere, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names. Time moved differently, racing like a river, sometimes still as glass. She could see fragments of both worlds through shimmering veils. Florence in 1348, Boston in the present day, dozens of other eras, layered like transparent sheets. But none of that mattered. Because Tommaso was walking toward her through the impossible flowers, his green eyes bright with wonder and relief. "Bella," he said, and her name sounded like coming home. "You waited." "Always," Marina replied, and realized it was true. She would have waited through all the centuries that separated them, through every lifetime and every possible world, because some connections transcend the boundaries of mortality. They met in the center of the garden, and when Tomas took her in his arms, Marina felt the final piece of her soul click into place. He was both the Renaissance nobleman she'd fallen in love with and the modern architect who'd searched for her across time. She was both the medieval woman who'd chosen love over logic and the scientist who'd always believed impossible things were simply waiting for the right conditions. "Is this real?" Thomas asked, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture that felt like the echo of 1,000 similar moments. "Real enough," Marina said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "We're together. Everything else is just details around them." The garden bloomed with new possibilities, a place where love could exist untouched by the constraints of linear time, where two souls could build a life that belonged entirely to them. The rings on their fingers pulsed once more, then settled into a steady, gentle warmth. The binding was complete. They were home. In the distance, church bells from every era chimed in harmony, marking not the passage of time, but its transcendence. Marina Williams and Thomas Lancaster, Tommaso Duca, and his beloved had found each other across the centuries and chosen to exist in the space between moments, where love was the only law that mattered. And there, in their impossible garden, they lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of the phrase, their love story written across time itself, eternal and unchanging imperfectly. It's possibly real. The end, like this video, if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.